In the early years of the Cold War, soldiers on both sides believed they were ready. They believed that after surviving the largest conflict in human history, nothing could truly surprise them anymore. They had seen tanks, bombers, artillery, and cities reduced to ashes. They thought they understood war, but the Cold War would teach them something different, because this time, fear did not come from explosions or gunfire. It came from silence, from strange machines, from lights in the sky, and from technology that felt decades ahead of its time. This is the story of moments during the Cold War when soldiers realized the enemy was not just dangerous, but frighteningly advanced. After World War II, the world split in two. On one side, the United States and its allies. On the other, the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc. Both sides raced to rebuild their militaries, convinced that technological superiority would decide the next war. But unlike previous conflicts, this war was mostly invisible. There were no massive invasions, no front lines stretching across continents. Instead, there were borders watched day and night, skies constantly monitored, and oceans filled with submarines no one could see. For the soldiers stationed in these places, tension was constant, and uncertainty was their greatest enemy. One of the first shocks came from the skies. In the late 1950s, American pilots flying reconnaissance missions over Europe began reporting strange experiences. Their radar screens would suddenly light up, tracking objects moving faster and higher than anything they had ever encountered. In many cases, these objects weren't visible to the naked eye. They existed only as blips on a screen. For pilots trained during World War II, this was terrifying. Back then, if you saw the enemy, you could fight. But now something was watching them from far above, untouchable and unseen. This fear became very real with the introduction of high-altitude spy aircraft. When American U-2 planes began flying deep into Soviet territory, Soviet air defense soldiers were stunned. Their fighter jets couldn't reach them. Their anti-aircraft guns were useless. For years, these planes flew almost freely, photographing secret bases and missile sites. Soviet radar operators could see them, but they could do nothing. Imagine being a soldier, responsible for defending your country, and realizing the enemy could see everything while you stood helpless. It was humiliating, and it was terrifying. But the shock did not belong to one side alone. When the Soviet Union finally shot down a U-2 plane in 1960 using a surface-to-air missile, American military planners were shaken. The idea that a missile, guided from the ground, could destroy an aircraft flying at extreme altitude changed everything. Pilots who once felt untouchable now knew they were vulnerable. The sky was no longer safe. On the ground, fear came in different forms. Along the borders of East and West Germany, NATO and Warsaw Pact soldiers watched each other constantly. They trained, they marched, they stared across fences and walls. But what truly scared them were the demonstrations of new weapons. Western soldiers observing Soviet military parades were disturbed by what they saw. Massive tanks, long-range missiles, and rocket launchers that seemed endless. Everything was bigger, heavier, and designed to overwhelm. Meanwhile, Eastern Bloc soldiers watching NATO exercises saw precision, coordination, and communication systems far beyond what they had been trained with. Both sides walked away thinking the same thing. If war breaks out, we might not survive. Nowhere was this fear stronger than underwater. Submarine warfare during the Cold War was a silent nightmare. Sailors aboard submarines knew that somewhere in the dark ocean, an enemy submarine might be tracking them. They would hear strange sounds through sonar, unfamiliar noises that suggested new propulsion systems or quieter engines. Some Soviet submariners later recalled moments when American submarines followed them so closely that it felt like being hunted by a ghost. They could hear the enemy, but they could not see them. One wrong move, one loud sound, and everything would end in seconds. American sailors felt the same fear. Soviet submarines grew faster, deeper, and more unpredictable. Some were equipped with nuclear missiles capable of destroying entire cities. The idea that a single unseen vessel could wipe out millions of lives weighed heavily on the minds of those tracking them. For these men, the Cold War was not theoretical. It was personal, and it was terrifying. Technology also changed the battlefield psychologically. Night vision, advanced surveillance, and early computer systems created an imbalance that shocked soldiers encountering them for the first time. In some Cold War proxy conflicts, fighters described moments when the enemy seemed to see everything, even in darkness. Being watched without knowing how or from where created panic. Soldiers began to feel powerless, exposed, and constantly vulnerable. Perhaps the most unsettling realization came with nuclear weapons. For the first time in history, soldiers understood that bravery, skill, and experience might not matter at all. A single missile could end everything. Many officers later admitted that this knowledge changed how they viewed war forever. The enemy didn't need to defeat you on the battlefield. They only needed to press a button. Throughout the Cold War, there were countless moments when soldiers, pilots, and sailors quietly understood something deeply disturbing. This was not a war of heroes charging forward. It was a war of engineers, scientists, and machines. And in many encounters, the most frightening part was realizing that the enemy's technology felt just a little too advanced, just a little too unstoppable. In the end, the Cold War did not erupt into global nuclear conflict, but for the men who stood guard at borders, flew dangerous missions, and sailed silent oceans. The fear was real. They lived every day knowing that the enemy might already be ahead, watching, listening, and waiting. And perhaps that was the greatest weapon of the Cold War. Not bombs, not bullets, but fear itself.